In the grand theater of the 20th century, few power couples commanded the stage quite like Henry Luce and Clare Boothe Luce. He was the stoic genius who built a media empire, the man behind Time, Life, and Fortune, the publisher who shaped how America saw the world. She was the brilliant, beautiful, and terrifyingly ambitious playwright, editor, socialite, and politician who shattered every glass ceiling she encountered. Together, they were a force of nature, a dynasty of influence and ideas, and at the very center of their dazzling world was a girl who was heir to it all. Her name was Ann Clare Brokaw, and she was their golden daughter. She was born with every imaginable advantage, destined for a life of extraordinary impact. Yet today her name is little more than a whisper, a footnote in the biographies of her famous parents. How can the beloved only child of one of history's most formidable women simply vanish from our collective memory? It's because Ann's story is not one of a life lived, but of a life lost, and how that single shattering event transformed her mother from a titan of industry into a tragic figure, forever haunted by the ghost of the daughter who was erased overnight. To understand Ann, you first have to understand the world she was born into. Imagine America in the 1920s and 30s. It was an age of explosive change and deep contradictions. The Roaring Twenties gave way to the Great Depression, a time of dizzying highs and devastating lows. In the halls of power and on the pages of glossy magazines, a new kind of royalty was emerging, the media mogul. And few were more powerful or more glamorous than Ann's parents. Her mother was the formidable Clare Boothe Luce. If ever a woman was a force of nature, it was Clare. She was a brilliant playwright, a razor-sharp magazine editor for Vanity Fair, a congresswoman, and later an ambassador. She moved through the world with an ambition and confidence that was almost unheard of for a woman of her time. She was beautiful, witty, and utterly ruthless when she needed to be. She collected powerful friends and enemies with equal ease, and her life was a whirlwind of politics, art, and high society. Ann's biological father was George Tuttle Brokaw, a millionaire socialite from an old New York family. Their marriage was tempestuous and short-lived, but the defining father figure in Ann's life would be her stepfather, the man Clare married when Ann was just a young girl, Henry Luce. Harry, as he was known, was the quiet thunder to Clare's lightning. He was the founder of a media empire that would define how Americans saw the world. Time, Life, Fortune, Sports Illustrated, these were his creations. He was arguably the most influential publisher of his generation, a man who could shape public opinion and make or break careers with the stroke of a pen. Together, Clare Boothe Luce and Henry Luce were the ultimate power couple. They presided over a world of glittering dinner parties, political intrigue, and global influence. They were the king and queen of a new American aristocracy, built not on old world titles, but on the power of information and the cult of celebrity. And into this dazzling high-pressure universe, their only child, Ann Clare Brokaw, was born. She was, from her first breath, the designated princess of this vast, glittering empire. The weight of that crown, however, would be heavier than anyone could have imagined. Ann Clare Brokaw was born on April 25th, 1924, in New York City. From the outside, her childhood was a fairy tale. She grew up in sprawling estates in Connecticut and South Carolina, surrounded by luxury, attended by governesses, and educated at the finest private schools. She was a beautiful child, with her mother's delicate features and a bright, inquisitive mind. But hers was not a simple, happy childhood. It was a life lived in the shadow of two colossal egos. Her mother, Clare, was a complicated and often distant maternal figure. She adored her daughter, calling her Ann C. and showering her with expensive gifts. Yet her ambition was a consuming fire. Her career as a writer, editor, and later a politician demanded constant travel and attention. Clare was a woman performing on the world stage, and motherhood was a role she sometimes struggled to fit into her demanding schedule. In her diaries and letters, she often expressed a mixture of deep love and profound guilt regarding Anne, aware that her own relentless drive often left her daughter in the care of others. Anne, in turn, developed a personality that was in many ways the opposite of her mother's. Where Clare was bold, outspoken, and dazzlingly confident, Anne was described as quiet, thoughtful, and deeply sensitive. She was a gentle soul in a world of sharp edges. She loved animals, especially horses, and found solace in riding and spending time in nature, far from the chaotic social world her parents inhabited. She was an excellent student, not with the flashy brilliance of her mother, but with a steady, serious intellect. She possessed a warmth and an unassuming kindness that endeared her to her friends and teachers. One little-known story perfectly captures this gentle nature. As a teenager at the exclusive Foxcroft School in Virginia, Anne was part of a close-knit group of friends. One of her classmates was struggling academically and emotionally, feeling lost among the daughters of America's elite. Anne, instead of ignoring her or joining in the subtle social hierarchies of the school, took the girl under her wing. She spent hours helping her with homework, and more importantly, simply listening to her. Decades later, this friend would recall Anne's quiet, steady kindness as a lifeline during a difficult time. It was a small act, but it speaks volumes about the young woman she was becoming, someone who valued genuine connection over status. As she grew older, the relationship with her mother became more complex. There was immense love, but also an undeniable tension. Clare, a perfectionist in all things, had sky-high expectations for her daughter. She wanted Anne to be brilliant, beautiful, and accomplished, a reflection of her own success. Anne, however, seemed to crave a simpler, more authentic life. She wasn't rebellious in an overt way, but she quietly carved out her own identity. While her mother was making headlines, Anne was excelling at Stanford University, studying history and international relations, and dreaming of a future that might not involve the glare of the public eye. In the summer of 1943, as World War II raged across the globe, Anne was a 19-year-old college sophomore, blossoming into a thoughtful and promising young woman. She was home from Stanford for a break, spending time with a college friend, Barbara Haddon. Her mother, Clare, was by then a freshman congresswoman from Connecticut, a rising star in the Republican Party, known for her hawkish views and fiery speeches. Henry Luce was at the zenith of his power, his magazine shaping the narrative of the war for millions of Americans. The future seemed limitless, not just for the Luce Empire, but for its bright young heiress. Then came the night of January 11th, 1944. It was a cold, clear evening. Anne and her friend Barbara were driving near the Stanford campus in Palo Alto, California. Anne was behind the wheel. We don't know exactly what happened in those final moments. Perhaps a moment of distraction, a patch of unseen ice on the road, a miscalculation by a young driver. The car swerved. It collided with another vehicle. The impact was catastrophic. Barbara hadn't survived with serious injuries. Ann Clare Brokaw, the golden daughter of America's most powerful media couple, was killed instantly. She was just 19 years old. The fairy tale had come to a brutal, screeching halt. The news of Anne's death shattered the carefully constructed world of Clare Boothe, Luce, and Henry Luce. For the public, it was a shocking headline, a tragic story about a famous family. But for Clare, it was an apocalypse. The grief that descended upon her was absolute and all-consuming. This woman, who had commanded boardrooms and congressional floors with icy composure, completely fell apart. Her secretary at the time, Letitia Baldridge, later described the scene when Clare received the news. She said Clare let out a primal scream that seemed to tear through the fabric of their Washington, D.C. home. For days she was inconsolable, locked away in her room, refusing to see anyone. The woman who had a witty retort for every occasion was rendered utterly silent by a grief so profound it seemed to swallow her whole. Henry Luce, a man known for his stoicism and emotional reserve, was also devastated. He flew immediately to California to identify his stepdaughter's body. A friend who accompanied him said that the powerful publisher who advised presidents and dictated global news simply wept like a lost child. He and Clare had often had a turbulent marriage, filled with arguments and infidelities, but Anne was the glue that held them together. Her death left a gaping wound in the heart of their relationship and their lives. One of the most poignant and rarely discussed artifacts of this period is a small privately printed book Clare compiled in the months after Anne's death. It was titled In Memoriam ACB. It wasn't for public consumption. She sent it only to Anne's closest friends and family. The book was a collection of Anne's own writings, poems, school essays, and letters, along with tributes from those who knew and loved her. Reading through it is a heartbreaking experience. You see Anne not as a famous heiress, but as a young woman grappling with life's big questions. In one essay written shortly before her death, she reflected on the war and the meaning of sacrifice, writing with a wisdom far beyond her years. In a poem, she wrote about the simple beauty of a sunset. The book is a mother's desperate attempt to hold on to the essence of a daughter who was just beginning to show the world who she was. In her own introduction, Clare wrote, "The world will not ever know what it has lost because it did not know her." It is perhaps the most honest and vulnerable sentence she ever published. The emotional impact rippled outwards. Anne's friends at Stanford were devastated. The university newspaper ran a front-page tribute, calling her one of Stanford's most brilliant and best-loved students. They remembered her not for her famous name, but for her quiet intelligence and her genuine warmth. The tragedy was so profound because Anne represented a pure, unspoiled promise. Unlike her parents, who were already complex, controversial figures, Anne was a blank slate of potential, a symbol of a better, brighter future. Her death felt like a theft, not just from her family, but from the world. In the aftermath of such a profound tragedy, the search for meaning and sometimes for blame is inevitable. While there was no public controversy surrounding the accident itself, the event threw the private life of Clare Boothe Luce, and specifically her role as a mother, into a harsh, analytical light. The historical debate isn't about the crash, but about the complex relationship that preceded it and the way Clare processed her grief in the years that followed. Biographers and historians have long been fascinated by the dynamic between Clare and Anne. Some portray Clare as a bad mother, a career-obsessed narcissist who was too preoccupied with her own ambitions to give her daughter the attention she needed. They point to her long absences, her high expectations, and her sometimes critical tone in letters to Anne as evidence of a maternal failing. In this interpretation, Anne's death becomes a sort of tragic karmic punishment for Clare's ambition, a narrative that, frankly, smacks of the sexism of the era, which often punished women for pursuing careers outside the home. However, a more nuanced reading, supported by Clare's private diaries and the accounts of those who knew them well, paints a much more complicated picture. This view doesn't absolve Clare of her shortcomings, but it frames them within the context of a woman struggling to balance immense personal drive with genuine, if imperfect, maternal love. Clare was in many ways inventing a new type of womanhood. There were no roadmaps for being a congresswoman, a famous playwright, and a mother in the 1940s. The tension between them was real. Anne was inherently a private person, and having a mother who was one of the most famous women in America was undoubtedly a heavy burden. There's evidence that Anne felt pressured by her mother's fame. A close friend of Anne's from Stanford later recalled that Anne rarely spoke of her parents on campus, preferring to be known for her own merits. This wasn't a rejection of them, but a young woman's natural desire to forge her own identity. One of the most debated aspects of the aftermath is how Clare's public persona shifted. Before the accident, she was seen as sharp, formidable, almost invincible. After, a new layer of tragedy was added to her public image. Some critics, then and now, have suggested that she, perhaps subconsciously, used the tragedy to soften her image, to make her more relatable and sympathetic to a public that sometimes found her too abrasive. This is a harsh judgment, but it speaks to the complexity of public grief. When a person lives their life on a stage, even their most private sorrow becomes a part of the performance. The truth, as it often is, likely lies somewhere in the middle. Clare's grief was undeniably real and soul-shattering. It wasn't a performance, but she was also a master of public relations and narrative. The way she channeled that grief into religion, into philanthropy, was both a genuine search for solace and a strategic reshaping of her own story. The controversy, then, is not about the sincerity of her pain, but about the inescapable entanglement of private sorrow and public identity in a life lived so intensely in the spotlight. Anne's death didn't just end a life, it fundamentally altered the narrative of one of America's most powerful women, leaving us to debate the true nature of their bond and the legacy of their loss. A single death can change the course of many lives. Ann Clare Brokaw's death was not a major historical event in the way a battle or an election is, but its consequences were profound, sending ripples through politics, religion, and the media landscape, primarily through the seismic transformation it caused in her mother. Before the accident, Clare Boothe Luce was a woman driven by worldly ambition. Her goals were political power, intellectual acclaim, and social dominance. After Anne's death, that all changed. The grief hollowed her out, creating a spiritual vacuum that her previous ambitions could no longer fill. This led to the most significant consequence of the tragedy: her conversion to Roman Catholicism. Lost in a fog of despair, Clare sought guidance from Bishop Fulton J. Sheen, a charismatic Catholic leader who had a popular radio show. Through months of intense instruction and spiritual counseling, Clare found a framework for her suffering. Catholicism offered her ritual, tradition, and the promise of redemption and reunion in the afterlife. In 1946, her conversion made national headlines. For a famously intellectual and cynical public figure to embrace traditional faith was a stunning development. It fundamentally altered her public identity. She was no longer just the sharp-tongued congresswoman. She was now a seeker, a penitent, a woman of deep, if newfound, faith. This spiritual transformation had tangible political and cultural impacts. Clare became one of America's most prominent Catholic laypeople. She wrote and spoke extensively about her faith, influencing countless people. Her later career as the U.S. ambassador to Italy under President Eisenhower was seen in part through this lens. She was now a diplomat representing a secular nation, but also a prominent Catholic in the heart of the Catholic world. Her faith informed her staunch anti-communism, which she saw as a battle against godless atheism. Anne's death, therefore, indirectly shaped a part of America's Cold War diplomacy. The tragedy also had a deep impact on Henry Luce and his media empire. While Harry did not convert, he became more introspective and more supportive of religious and philosophical explorations within his magazines. Life magazine, for instance, began running more features on world religions and spiritual themes, a subtle but significant shift for a publication focused on current events and photojournalism. Anne's death humanized the Luce Empire, reminding readers that behind the powerful institutions were people grappling with the same universal sorrows as everyone else. Ann Clare Brokaw's legacy lies in her lost potential. She was more than a tragic footnote in her famous mother's biography. She was an intelligent and kind young woman, just beginning to find her own voice. With her quiet and compassionate nature, she might have steered the Luce Empire down a more humanistic path, perhaps as a philanthropist or a scholar. Her death created a vacuum, a haunting what if, that suggests a different future for one of America's most powerful media dynasties. Anne's story is a profound reminder that private tragedy can shape public history. For her mother, Clare Boothe Luce, a woman who built her life on control and intellect, the death of her only child was a wound that never healed. This grief completely reshaped her existence, sending her searching for answers in spirituality, a realm far beyond the political world that once defined her. By changing such a powerful woman, this quiet tragedy subtly altered the course of cultural and political history.